In this episode, we're going to look at the front door of an AI security system, the data you feed into it. When people worry about AI going wrong, they often focus on the model itself, but the model is only as good and as safe as the inputs it receives. If the input data is fake, tampered with, incomplete, or coming from an untrustworthy source, the model can produce outputs that are misleading or harmful even if it is behaving exactly as designed. For beginners, the key idea is that data intake is a security boundary. You do not just accept data because it arrived. You check authenticity, decide how much you trust the source, and track where the data came from so you can explain and audit decisions later. Once you treat data intake like a security control, you reduce the chances of being tricked by poisoned inputs, confused by noisy context, or forced into making decisions you cannot defend. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Authenticity checks are about answering a simple question. Is this data really what it claims to be, and has it been altered in transit or at rest? In traditional cybersecurity, authenticity might be verified by digital signatures, secure channels, or device identity mechanisms. In an AI pipeline, the same idea applies, but it can show up in everyday ways, like verifying that a log file came from the real logging system, not from a copied text snippet in an email. Beginners often underestimate this because the data looks familiar. A screenshot of an alert, a pasted block of log lines, or a forwarded ticket can all look legitimate. But any of those can be edited by a person or generated by an attacker, and a model will not automatically know the difference unless you build checks around it. One practical authenticity pattern is to prefer direct ingestion from authoritative systems over user-pasted content whenever possible. If you can pull telemetry directly from an endpoint platform, a network sensor, or a ticketing database, you reduce the risk that someone is feeding you a curated or altered view. If you must accept pasted data, you treat it as lower trust by default. That means you avoid making high-impact decisions based only on pasted snippets, and you ask for corroboration from the original system when the stakes are high. This is not about distrusting users. It is about recognizing that the easiest way to manipulate an AI system is often to manipulate what it sees. Data authenticity is the first line of defense against that manipulation. Source trust is the next concept, and it is slightly different from authenticity. Data can be authentic and still untrustworthy for your purpose. For example, a genuine log entry might be incomplete, noisy, or generated by a misconfigured sensor. A real report might be biased or written with an agenda. Source trust is about rating how reliable a source tends to be and how appropriate it is for the decision you are trying to make. In security, we already do this informally. We trust certain sensors more than others. We treat certain feeds as high quality and others as more speculative. The goal is to make that habit explicit in AI workflows so the model does not treat every input as equally meaningful. A beginner-friendly way to think about source trust is to imagine a sliding scale. On one end are sources that are strongly controlled and verifiable, like signed telemetry from a managed device, or internal databases with access controls and audit logs. In the middle are sources that are real but messy, like human-written tickets, chat messages, and ad hoc notes. On the low-trust end are sources that can be easily manipulated and are not linked to a reliable identity, like anonymous uploads, copied text without context, and claims without evidence. When you ingest data, you decide where it sits on that scale, and you carry that trust rating forward. That rating can affect how the model is prompted, how confident it is allowed to be, and what actions the system can take based on the model's output. Provenance tracking ties authenticity and source trust together by answering another simple question. Where did this data come from, and what happened to it along the way? Provenance is the chain of custody for data. It includes the source system, the time it was collected, who accessed it, what transformations were applied, and how it was routed into the AI model. This matters because security work needs to be explainable. If you make a decision based on an AI summary, you should be able to trace that summary back to specific inputs. If an incident report is questioned later, You should be able to show what evidence was used and whether that evidence was trustworthy. Without provenance, you cannot defend your conclusions, and you cannot easily fix mistakes because you do not know where the bad data entered. A common misconception is that provenance is only for compliance teams. In reality, provenance is a practical debugging tool. If the model produces a weird conclusion, you want to know if it was because the input was missing key fields, because a data transformation stripped out context, or because the source was low quality. Provenance lets you answer those questions quickly. It also helps detect attacks. If an attacker tries to slip in a poisoned input, provenance makes it easier to see that the data came from an unusual path, an unfamiliar account, or a source you do not normally use. You are turning mystery inputs into traceable artifacts. Traceability is a security superpower because it reduces the time you spend guessing. Now let's talk about how these ideas reduce real risks. One risk is data poisoning at intake, where an attacker feeds the system misleading examples to shape the model's behavior or conclusions. This can be as simple as repeatedly submitting fake incident narratives that the model later treats as typical, or as targeted as embedding instructions inside an uploaded document so the model follows them. Another risk is context flooding, where a user provides a huge amount of irrelevant data so that the model misses the important signal. Authenticity checks help because they reduce acceptance of random content. Source trust helps because it reduces the weight given to low-quality inputs. Provenance helps because it makes suspicious patterns visible, such as repeated submissions from an unusual source. These controls do not require you to be a cryptography expert. They require you to be disciplined about what you accept and how you label it. A practical intake pattern is to normalize identity at the door. That means you associate data with a known user, system, or service account, and you record that association. If the data arrives without identity, you treat it as lower trust. This is the same idea as not accepting admin requests from an unknown caller. Identity does not automatically make data true, but it gives you accountability, which is essential for security. It also allows you to apply access policies, like only accepting certain data types from certain systems, or only allowing certain teams to submit incident evidence. When you combine identity with provenance, you can later answer who submitted this and when, which is a basic but powerful form of control. Another practical pattern is integrity checking, which is about detecting whether data was altered after it was collected. For some data, you can use hashes, signing, or secure transport to confirm integrity. For beginners, it is enough to remember that integrity checks are how you prevent silent edits. If you collect an artifact, you want to know it did not change before analysis. Even when you are not using cryptographic tools, you can still practice integrity thinking by keeping original copies, avoiding manual edits, and recording transformations explicitly. If a pipeline cleans data, you log what fields were removed or changed. If someone manually redacts sensitive data, you record that redaction step. That way, when the model produces a conclusion, you know exactly what version of the data it saw. Source trust also includes understanding incentives and biases. A security vendor blog might be useful, but may emphasize certain narratives. A user ticket might exaggerate impact because they want fast help. An automated alert might overtrigger because the detection rule is noisy. None of this makes the sources worthless. It just means you should not treat them as equally reliable for every purpose. A well-designed intake system can tag sources with reliability levels, and your model prompts can instruct the model to weigh high-trust telemetry more than low-trust narratives when they disagree. This is a subtle but important safety move because it reduces the chance that a persuasive human-written paragraph overrides more reliable machine evidence. Provenance tracking becomes even more important when data is transformed, which is common in AI systems. You might parse logs, extract fields, remove duplicates, redact sensitive information, or convert formats. Each transformation can accidentally drop a clue that matters for security, like a timestamp, a host name, or a user identifier. Provenance helps you see what transformations occurred and whether they were appropriate. It also helps you reproduce results. If you need to rerun an analysis, you want to feed the model the same inputs, not a slightly different version created by ad hoc edits. Reproducibility is not just a science concept. It is a security concept, because you need to explain what you did and you need to be able to do it again when questioned. There is also a human side to secure intake that beginners should not ignore. People often want the model to make a quick decision from whatever they have on hand, like a screenshot or a pasted snippet. The safer practice is to slow down just enough to ask whether the input is complete and reliable. If it is not, you either gather more evidence or you label the analysis as preliminary. This is where calibrated confidence connects to intake security. You can allow the model to produce a tentative hypothesis based on low-trust input, but you do not let that hypothesis trigger irreversible action. In other words, you treat low-trust inputs as a starting point for questions, not as a foundation for conclusions. By the end of this episode, the main takeaway is that secure AI starts before the model runs. Authenticity checks help you avoid being fooled by altered or fake data. Source trust helps you weigh inputs appropriately and prevents low-quality sources from dominating decisions. Provenance tracking gives you accountability, auditability, and the ability to debug and defend conclusions. Together, these practices turn data intake from a passive pipe into an active security boundary. When you build that boundary, you make the model safer, not because the model became smarter, but because you made it harder for bad or unreliable data to shape its behavior in the first place. That is a core skill in AI security, and it will keep showing up as we talk about cleaning data, preventing leakage, and preserving integrity across the entire pipeline.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.